I'm particularly also delighted to introduce our next speaker, who I've long wanted to meet, and this is my opportunity. Alan Francis is Professor Emeritus at Duke University, known to many of you for his very impressive change of heart, change of stance, with his fantastic book, Saving Normal, where he has opened our eyes to the issues of overdiagnosis in psychiatry. Alan Francis, we really look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, first off, I think we have to look to this table with great gratitude, not just for organizing a wonderful meeting, but also for all you've done to prepare for this meeting in the initiatives of the last several years. I think that the British Medical Journal, Fiona, Dartmouth with Steve and Lisa, Bond University with Ray sitting at this table, and Consumer Reports are the slingshot in a David and Goliath struggle that's a long shot, but one that I'm happy to bet on. And we thank you for all you've done. Aldous Huxley, another futurologist, along with George Orwell, said, medical science is making such wonderful advances that very soon no one will be well. And that was prescient, certainly in psychiatry. We have 25% of the population having a disorder in any given year, 50% lifetime. And a recent study done at Duke, going prospectively, found that by age 21, 81% of kids would have a mental disorder. If you study people carefully enough, no one escapes. We now have 20% of our population in the US taking psychotropic medication, 6% addicted to it. We have more deaths, more emergency room visits from the drugs prescribed by doctors than from the drugs given out by corner boys on behalf of the drug cartels. The problem in psychiatry is particularly acute, partly because it's so lucrative. Everyone has psychiatric symptoms. Partly because our field lacks a biological test. Translational medicine is difficult throughout medicine. Drawing boundaries is difficult, even if you have biological or physiological findings. It's particularly difficult if you're basing your diagnosis on subjective and fallible self-report. The brain is the most complicated thing in the known universe. We've learned an amazing amount about its normal functioning in the last 30 years. It's one of the great intellectual endeavors of our time. But all happy brains, all normal brains, are pretty normal in the same way. All unhappy brains, all pathological disorders, have very different foundations. And so it's very difficult to find the 100 or 200 or 500 ways a person can become schizophrenic. It will never be one disease. It will be many, many diseases. And so that translational step is particularly difficult in psychiatry, and that leads to all sorts of problems. I was in the middle of it, so that when we completed DSM-4 20 years ago, we were pretty proud. We wanted to hold the line against diagnostic inflation. We thought we had. Naive. 3 years later, the drug companies in the US got the unique right to advertise directly to consumers, and they jumped into that loophole with vigor, enthusiasm, brilliance, and billions of dollars. ADD tripled, and the drug sales increased by 100-fold. Autism has increased by 40 times since DSM-4. Childhood bipolar disorder in the US increased by 40 times, despite the fact we had rejected it. It showed how impotent the system can be. So I was given to think about the problems of overdiagnosis in my field, but also more generally, and I've come up with a 12-point program towards taming it. The reason pharma's first is pharma is the biggest culprit. That certainly they shouldn't be allowed to directly advertise to consumers. I think equally certainly the marketing to doctors is clearly not education. Needs to be either monitored or stopped. Control of politicians, they spend twice as much on marketing as they do on research. The good news here, the hope here is that big tobacco was as powerful as the pharmaceutical industry 25 years ago. And a small group of brothers and sisters brought them down. There's hope that this group can be the beginning of a similar crusade with, we hope, similar results. The insurance companies, especially in the United States, a lot of these things are more U.S. than the world, but the world, sadly, is catching up. England is beginning to copy our very worst. We have a medical system that couldn't have been conceived more brilliantly by an enemy of the United States. Our medical industrial complex is a brilliant conception if you wanted to destroy our economy. And it's working exactly to do that. The insurance companies, which could be helping, see themselves as a pass-through. So the higher the cost of medical care, the higher their profit. They have had no incentive. Their incentives are not aligned in a way that would reduce medical care costs. They are not a filter, not a help. And in the U.S., they do something that's particularly dumb. They don't cover visits unless there's a diagnosis. A diagnosis is a very important moment in a patient's life. Diagnoses last for a lifetime. They haunt. They shouldn't be made in 7 minutes. And most diagnoses in psychiatry are made in primary care in 7 minutes. Medication that is very hard to sunset shouldn't be started impulsively and on the basis of a very brief contact. The insurance companies in the U.S. require a diagnosis to pay the doctor. This was initiated as a cost control measure. In the short run, it may discourage visits for evaluations, but in the long run, it leads to diagnoses and treatments that are enormously expensive. They need to be wised up, and their incentives changed. Guidelines. I've been herding experts for the last 35 years. You can never trust an expert in his recommendations in his own field, flat out. I've never met an expert who wanted to narrow his field of interest. Just doesn't happen. Everyone wants to expand their area of interest. Some of this, as Ray has brilliantly pointed out, some of this is financial conflict of interest, conscious or unconscious financial conflict of interest. But I've been impressed by the inability of even the cleanest guideline panel members to ever think through the risks of expanding their area. The intellectual conflict of interest is just as severe, and we can't prevent financial conflicts of interest and hope that that will make it okay. We can't let experts make final decisions. They need to be part of the process, but only part of the process. The panels need to include expertise in health policy, in economics, consumer concerns, primary care. We can't have experts in an area determine that area. The new diagnostic guidelines are just as dangerous as new drugs, sometimes more dangerous. Lots of new drugs are Me Too drugs. New guidelines that reduce the blood pressure standards for hypertension, or reduce the bone densities for osteoporosis, or reduce the number of weeks you need before you get a diagnosis of schizophrenia. These can have a profound impact. Tens of millions of people can be made into patients by the jotting of a pen or the typing of a computer key. We should be giving the same concern to vetting new diagnoses that we do for new drugs. And the new drug vetting is not good enough. We need an even more intense analysis of the risks as well as the benefits. We have to retrain the existing doctors who have been brainwashed. We have to train properly the new doctors who are in medical school now, so the prescription writing becomes something serious, not just something you do with every visit. And we have to realign incentives. Realistically speaking, you can do all the training in the world, and if the doc makes a big part of his living by overdiagnosing and over-testing, he'll continue doing it. So you can't just rely on winning hearts and minds. You also have to appeal to the pocketbook. Quality assurance. The LA Times did a wonderful series showing that a few high-flying docs are responsible for most of the polypharmacy deaths. So identifying, shaming, disciplining the doctors who are prescribing wildly, very important. And something that came out yesterday in a meeting, quality assurance tends to focus on what's missed. It doesn't focus nearly enough on what's too much. Polypharmacy is a nightmare. The average geriatric patient getting 6 or 7 medicines that interact. I think that we need to have a system like MasterCard. If you travel to a different country and you don't call them and tell them you're going to be in that country, and you try to charge a restaurant bill for $70, they won't approve it. They have a real on-time method of stopping stupid things. A patient can come to a pharmacy with a group of prescriptions that will kill them, or go to 5 pharmacies with prescriptions that will kill them, and the pharmacies will passively give out the medication. The delivery system is out of control. We're trying to control the borders against illegal drugs, and we failed at that for 40 years. We have no control over the delivery system within the country that's responsible for more deaths. It's a crazy thing. We need a computerized system that monitors the dispensing of drugs. We need to focus on the prescription of drugs, but also the dispensing of drugs to make sure it's being done in the right way. Now, consumer groups have become part of the problem, not the solution. And that's why the Consumer Reports Initiative is so absolutely wonderful. The consumer groups have been largely corrupted by the drug companies. They are also corrupted by an incentive to have more members. The more members you have, the more powerful you are, politically, economically. The more members you have, the less stigmatized is the condition. It becomes the normal, the new normal. There has been very little concern that increasing resources for a particular disorder will hurt the people involved rather than help them. Now, we get to the journals. I think that it's wonderful that the journals are beginning to come around to the idea that overdiagnosis is just as important as underdiagnosis, and that not every scientific finding needs to be translated into a quick lab test. The BMJ has certainly taken the lead on this. But I think we have to admit that over the last 40 years, there's been a journal-wide scientific exuberance that has trumpeted every finding as if it's the beginning and the end of cancer. We've won the battle against cancer thousands and thousands of times, and we've lost the war. The smoking reduction was much more important than all the research in cancer, I think. I don't know if Barry would agree with me. But the idea that every journal article seems to promise the scientific breakthrough that will quickly be translated into clinical findings, and that there are news conferences, the reporters pick it up, something that Barry's worked very hard to discipline. Steve and Elise also. I think that we have to admit that the journals aren't neutral in this, that they've been part of the problem. Okay, the media, I think the only criticism of this meeting is the media weren't here. The reporters should have been talking to all of you throughout the meeting, and I would hope in the future that it's publicized in a way to capture media attention. If we talk to ourselves, it's a waste of time. I think we have to make contact with government, that one congressional staffer can do more than all of us put together. Getting the right person to get really interested in this, making this his life's work is crucial. I think there should be price tags on the internet for every medical procedure performed by every deliverer, the way there are for plane tickets. That everything should be priced and transparent. I want you to see the movie The Hospital, 1972, George C. Scott. It will make you laugh and it will make you cry. And I was going to end the talk with that, but then I realized it's too sad. So there's another movie you should also see after you see The Hospital. It's called Miracle. It's not a good movie. The Hospital's a brilliant movie, one of the best ever made. The movie Miracle is not a brilliant movie, but it has a brilliant message, an inspirational message, which I'll end with. My grandchildren are sick of my saying this, but now I have a new audience. Herb Brooks, the coach of the American hockey team in 1980, is faced with the task of inspiring his team of basically college kids who average 20 years old, who are playing a team from Russia that's won the world championship for the last many years. The Russians are 28 years old on average. They have the best players in the world. The Russians beat the Americans 7-0 the week before. And now they're in the semifinals of the Olympics. And he says this. He says, boys, I almost tear up every time I say this. Boys, the Russians are the greatest hockey team in the world. If we play them 10 times, they beat us 9 out of 10 times. But not this time. Not this night. This night, we are the greatest hockey team in the world. Go out there, boys, and skate with them. And I think that we have almost no resources. My guess is that all of the money put together combating overdiagnosis would be in the single-digit millions, even if you defined it broadly. My guess is the drug companies alone are spending $60 billion promoting overdiagnosis. And if you look at all the things the hospitals do to overcode, that everyone does to overcode and to do, it's probably in the hundreds of billions of dollars promoting overdiagnosis. There are a few million here, hundreds of billions of there. There's no chance to win. But it was the same odds. I was around then. It was the same odds with tobacco. And sometimes, every once in a while, right does make might. And let's hope that that's true here. And these guys are the ones who inspired it.